Thanks for tuning into the Red Clinic Podcast. My name is Dr. Schwalen, licensed psychologist and expert in the treatment of eating disorders. Today, I'm going to talk about stages of change and how it applies to eating disorder treatment. And really, the reason I'm talking about this is because quite often I hear from families and parents and concerned individuals that they don't know if their loved one is really ready for treatment or will engage in treatment. They worry that, especially nowadays with like more telehealth and virtual sessions even, that it'll be very difficult for their child or their loved one to even get anything out of it because they're concerned about how motivated their child is. And so I want to talk about that. In general, in therapy, it's really good practice to think about what level of motivation a client has and try to meet them where they're at as much as possible so that the most work and the most change can happen. And this is especially true and even more so true with clients who have eating disorders, because a lot of times clients with eating disorders are thrown into treatment and may not be motivated at all. But everyone around them knows that they need it and they're doing what they need to do to try to save that person's life and get them healthy again. And so in that situation, we come across all the time when clients aren't necessarily like fully on board and gung-ho about doing treatment. And as the providers, we need to really be able to work with that and still instill some change in the person, regardless of how motivated they are. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So stages of change. The reason I'm talking about stages of change with those terms is because this is actually it's just a trans-theoretical approach to treatment. And that's a big fancy way of saying this is a theory that, researchers have put into place to give credit where credit is due. This is a theory that was developed by Prochaska and DiClemente a long time ago. And essentially, they established this theory to apply to adults with substance abuse disorders. And then ever since that theory has been developed, it's been applied to all different kinds of ages and presenting issues. So it's not just adults with substance abuse disorders that this theory really can be applied to. We can apply it to kids and adults with eating disorders, kids and adults with anxiety or depression disorders. Like, we can look at it all different ways for all different kinds of people. And I really like it because it helps me really understand where someone is coming from. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about each stage in terms of what the stage is called, and then describe to you what someone in a particular stage might be dealing with, and then how in eating disorder treatment we would deal with that person's level of motivation. So I want to start off first by saying the stages of change theory is not linear, okay? So even though I'm going to talk about this in stages like as one coming after the other, I really want to get across the fact that at any time, just because we are human beings, we can be in more than one stage at the same time. We can skip stages. We may go forward and then find ourselves moving backwards. And that's just because it's human nature. And we are constantly evolving and changing every day. And so that is really how our relationship, even with feeling motivated to change, can look. But for the purposes of today's just conversation with y'all, I am going to talk about it as if these stages go in a certain order. Think about lifestyle changes. This is kind of how I help people like make sense of this. Every New Year's, people will say, what are your New Year's resolutions? Oh, I know. I'm going to lose a bunch of weight. I'm going to go on a diet. I'm going to sleep more. I'm going to stop drinking. I'm going to do all these great things. And then usually what people say is that, the first of the year, they're super motivated. They make it happen. And then about a month or two later, they just drop off and go back to old habits. It's kind of different than what I'm talking about. So what I'm actually talking about or referring to is like a true lifestyle change. So what does it take to know when someone has like fully arrived, right? So they kind of set out to do this thing or change this way of living, and they're not just working on it, but they're like truly maintaining this new way of being. And so in eating disorder work, we call that recovery. True recovery is being able to know that that eating disorder is a small voice in your head. It's no longer the loudest voice, or it feels like it's completely behind you and it's just no longer a part of anything you're going through anymore. Being able to completely move forward from those issues is true recovery. And that's like for a long time, for the rest of your life, whatever that's going to look like, but that's what I'm talking about. And so getting someone there and understanding the stages of change that they have to go through is a really big part of eating disorder treatment. So the first stage that I like to talk about is called pre-contemplation. Okay, so per Prochaska and DiClemente, pre-contemplation. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's the concept of the person who has the problem isn't even really thinking about it. So they're not contemplating it, they're pre-contemplating, right? So this is the situation where everyone around you may think there's something wrong or there's an issue, but you yourself does not believe that really anything needs to change. The example I really like to use to help people like really understand and relate to this is the example of someone who smokes cigarettes. Now I know that's like not really a thing anymore because people vape and they have a Juul or whatever it is. But when smoking cigarettes used to be a very much more popular thing, and maybe health risks and concerns weren't even really known at that time, people used to smoke cigarettes during like work breaks or socializing. It used to be a very common thing. And it was so accepted that at one point in our like society's lifetime, people could smoke cigarettes inside public places. If they gathered around like the ashtray outside a building, they could socialize and make friends with each other. And it's kind of like everyone knew who the smokers in the building were, and they would look for each other and really hang out. And so as more research, came out and studies showed that there's actually a lot of health risks associated with smoking, and the awareness went up, more and more people started talking about the fact that if you don't quit, you can get lung cancer or emphysema or whatever. Well, there was a time where many people still would smoke despite knowing the health risks. And so maybe your wife or your children or your even friends or coworkers would tell you, like, smoking's bad for you, you shouldn't do this. Or there's even this big label on the carton of cigarettes that says, smoking can kill. And you bypass all of those warnings and do it anyways with no intention of changing. That's someone who would be in pre-contemplation. So the person who's in eating disorder treatment, for example, might need inpatient level of care because they are at 70% of ideal body weight, they're extremely malnourished and dehydrated, they're at risk for many health complications and even death associated with malnutrition, and so they are hospitalized as inpatient. But that individual is so deep in their eating disorder, the eating disorder has such a grip on them that they may be the entire time saying, this place is not for me. I don't need this. There's nothing wrong with me. All these other kids or adults are sick, but I'm not. And they may be in complete denial. And so that's really what we call, that's really like another way of saying pre-contemplation. Now, the next question I usually get is, what if my child or my loved one is in this stage and they truly believe nothing's wrong with them? Could you educate them on all the health risks that are associated with what's going on with them? Because it's like, if you just tell the smoker like how they could die from smoking, maybe they'll quit, right? So if you just tell the person who's extremely malnourished that they could potentially die, maybe they'll start eating, right? So it's not necessarily like that at all. We know that that's not effective. We cannot instill fear in the person who's in pre-contemplation. We can't use that as a way to motivate. It generally doesn't work and doesn't ever have the effect that we are looking for. So instead, what we do in treatment when a person's in this stage is we really just want to support the fact that, we understand what the person's going through. We hear what they're saying, that they're not really ready to change or thinking about change. And we really try to focus here on creating that desire to change. But we do that like gradually, very lovingly, very therapeutically. And we also know, especially with eating disorders, that in time, as that person is getting, nutritionally rehabilitated and refed, that their brain is going to start making better connections. And once they're no longer brain starved and they're able to make more connections, they're going to also be able to see that, hey, there's something to this. I was hospitalized for a reason and I really want to get out of here now. And so sometimes that's the motivation where it's like all external. I want to get out of here. I never want to be hospitalized again, or I'm going to eat because my mom is so upset with me and I don't want to disappoint her. And so that's the reason I'm going to do this. And at this point, we'll take it. Like whatever the reason is, we go with it. Over time in treatment, we know that we eventually have to establish some like intrinsic motivation to change. But if all we're getting at this stage is some external reason, we go with that. And we use it as a way to build momentum towards recovery. Now, the next stage, if we were going like in a linear fashion, is called contemplation. Contemplation is exactly what it sounds like. It's thinking about change, talking about change, buying into it a little bit more. Hey, there's something to this. Maybe there's something that I could improve about my life, or maybe I should heed the warnings here about, how smoking is deadly. So the smoker example that I'm using, this person may start reading more research on the ill effects of smoking cigarettes. They may want to talk to their doctor about it, or do some Google searches and just get a little bit more information. They're definitely thinking about it. And they may even start researching alternatives to smoking. So they might start thinking about, how do I quit? What steps do I need to take to get there? Someone in eating disorder treatment is going to be more or less the same. They're, I think I'm struggling. I think I need help. They may be more willing to reach out and ask for help. So if it's a child, I've heard many times in clinic, the child went to the parents and said, I really need someone to talk to. I'm not feeling very good. I think I need professional help. The other piece to contemplation, though, and I like to describe it as like being on the fence. It's like there's no action that's happening at this point. It's just thinking about it. And so when someone's thinking about change, they're not necessarily like fully bought in yet. I like to describe it as dipping your toe in the water just to like check the temperature and then quickly pulling back and deciding it's not for you. This happens a lot in the contemplation stage. So there's more openness to like thinking about it and hearing about what the issues are, but not necessarily doing much about it yet because it's still uncomfortable to go there all the way. In eating disorder treatment, if someone's in contemplation, we're not going to get into like negotiation with the eating disorder or with the client. We're going to really just let that evolve. So when I say we're not going to get into negotiation, sometimes an eating disorder or the person may be wanting to try out new coping strategies. And then other times they're going to say, well, how about I just eat, breakfast, but I skip snack, and then I'll eat lunch, and then I'll skip my snacks, and then I'll eat dinner, and that should be good enough, right? Well, no, that's not good enough. So it's like kind of this vacillating or on the fence attitude, and that full-blown commitment isn't there yet. When clients are in this stage, we'll just go with that. We'll address the dissonance, hey, you're saying one thing, but then when it comes down to it, you're doing the other. And like, let's just process that. Let's talk about it, because we know that whenever anyone is trying to achieve recovery or make a true lifestyle change, this is very normal. This is a normal part of the human process. We are creatures of habit. We want to go towards what is comfortable, even though we know that what's comfortable might be really bad for us. And so that tendency to go back to what feels comfortable is what someone in contemplation may be doing. The next stage after contemplation, one more thing I want to say, because I do have the notes here, and this is really important. if your loved one is in this stage and they are struggling with an eating disorder, they may say things like, I have dreams and goals that I want to achieve, but I'm going to try to do that with my eating disorder, not despite the eating disorder or without it, but I can have my eating disorder and my dreams in life too. Or they might say something like, I really want to get rid of my eating disorder, but I also still have a desire to be thin. And so there's this, wanting both at the same time, even though those two things don't necessarily go together. The preparation stage is the next one after contemplation. I see clients in this stage all the time, especially because I'm working with kids and adults. I mean, adults will call in on their own, kids will come in and they're kind of thrown into this stage and they may not necessarily want this, but their parents put them there. So preparation is a very common stage for the outpatient setting, which is what the Red Clinic focuses on. Preparation is really about planning what it would be like to make that change. So now you're not just thinking about it, but you're putting plans into place. So the smoking example I've been using, this person might be, making that doctor's appointment, talking about, ways to quit that don't include just quitting cold turkey, for example, using a patch or chewing gum or whatever it may be, coming up with a plan to go down from like smoking a pack a day to half a pack to a quarter of a pack to just a few a week or whatever it looks like. That would be a preparation type of thing that a person's doing. In eating disorder treatment or outpatient treatment in general, if someone's in this stage, they're starting to talk to their therapist about, what are some other alternatives for coping with my stress or anxiety or depression so that I don't turn to the eating disorder. So learning new coping skills, putting together a coping plan, doing things like practicing those skills in sessions and getting ready or preparing for like when the rubber hits the road kind of moment. So I can talk about this, I can process it. That's what we do in therapy. I come up with a plan for how I'm going to handle that situation. And then when the situation actually occurs in my real life, not just talking about it in session, I'm going to be ready to deal with that. So in eating disorder treatment, this is really all about coming up with action plans, understanding the eating disorder, building insight with the client about, here's what the eating disorder makes me do, or here's how it makes me think, and these are the things that I can do instead to really make the eating disorder weaker or less prevalent in my life. And then the stage after that is action. So action is that moment where the rubber hits the road. So now you've done all this preparation, you've really analyzed it, you've talked it out, you've come up with all these plans. But when a person can consistently make changes without reverting back to the status quo, that's when they're in true action. So it's time for someone with anorexia to start making meal plans so they have to eat all their foods and drink their fluids. And they're able to do it consistently every single time or most of the time, right? Or instead of shutting down and isolating, they are now using I statements and effectively communicating and getting their needs met. Instead of, reverting to suppressing feelings, not dealing with anxiety, distracting all day long, and ultimately having panic attacks, they are now doing things like journaling or self-care activities. Maybe they're taking a bubble bath, they're going for a walk, they're going to bed earlier because they know that enough sleep really helps them. So these are things that, we can rely on when someone's in action. This means they're ready to do it, they are doing it. And then even when faced with like the temptation to go back to the old way of doing things, they are able to come back to the therapy session and talk about that. So this morning I restricted, but I turned that around because this afternoon I made a different choice and I honored my body and I nourished myself. And so understanding that, my eating disorder wanted me to do this, but instead I chose this or that, that's really true action. That's a really fun time in treatment because that's when people can really start realizing who they are without the eating disorder. It's when, myself as a clinician, I get to see someone just achieve their true potential. And it's really, really exciting time. And then maintenance is kind of that last stage in the stages of change model. When someone is in action consistently for 6 months to a year, then we know someone has truly achieved maintenance. They're truly in recovery. And this is truly a new lifestyle. It's like the new version of them. It's the new normal. They're no longer under the control of the eating disorder. The smoker has effectively quit smoking for good and essentially will never go back to it, or has a lot of tools in place to overcome the temptation to go back to it. And so that's what maintenance is. And so this is someone who's continuing to achieve, but with less and less support. They're showing their ability to maintain, weight restoration for eating disorder treatment. They're handling stress. They're handling school and work and life obligations. And they're engaging in their outpatient appointments very successfully. They're coming to session and they're very accountable for what their struggles are, and they're able to kind of openly discuss those and choose a different a way of dealing with it, so a healthy coping skill. And they understand, too, what their red flags are. So someone who's in true maintenance really has good insight developed. They can say, this is just a bump in the road. Like I had this temptation to skip lunch today. That's a bump in the road. Versus I've skipped many meals. I'm back to over-exercising, and I'm canceling all my sessions with you because I'm so in my eating disorder again. I need to go back to treatment. I need to go back to the hospital or something. So what we know about maintenance is that eating disorder clients are, 9 to 11 times more likely to relapse. They don't truly achieve maintenance. And we know that maintenance isn't truly achieved until at least 6 months to a year of being in outpatient treatment. And I'm talking about outpatient because I'm thinking about the step-down model. So individuals with eating disorders, if they step down, like from inpatient to partial to IOP to outpatient, then I know that if I'm working with a client that's gone through that entire step-down, I'm going to be working with them for at least 6 months to a year because my goal is to get them into recovery and to prevent a relapse. Now, I talk about relapse because this is not necessarily an official stage in the stages of change model, but it's definitely something to consider in eating disorder treatment. Some eating disorder clients just may not be truly ready to create change in their life. And so I see this all the time where clients will, I've said it before, and it's a term that's used amongst eating disorder professionals where clients will white knuckle it through treatment. So they're really good at achieving, and they're over-controlled, and they're perfectionistic, and so those exact traits go into checking all the boxes to get through treatment. And so they're able to eat all their food, and they're able to, use coping skills, and they're able to talk about their struggles. And then as soon as they're not in treatment anymore, they relapse. And it's because that external motivation actually never converted to internal motivation. So earlier I had said sometimes people in the contemplation or pre-contemplation stage will still check all the boxes and do what's expected of them because they don't want to disappoint their family, or they just want to get out of the hospital. And so they're able to. They bear through it. They do what they're supposed to do so that they can check the boxes and leave treatment. But ultimately, because they didn't develop that sense of internal motivation, they end up relapsing. And a lot of families have shame and frustration that's associated with this, disbelief. I mean, I've seen it all, and it's a really hard thing for families to wrap their heads around. But I want to say that relapse ultimately can just be a part of someone's process. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It might be actually exactly what they need. Sometimes somebody going through it again, or maybe even a third time, is what's necessary in order to achieve that true transformation of recovery. And so when someone does relapse, we look at it as, okay, this is just part of the process. Relapse happened, and now we're going to go through it all over again. But hopefully now the seeds have been planted, some growth and maturity has occurred, and the person that's experiencing the treatment this time is not necessarily the same person that experienced it the first time. And so we rely on that evolution of just being a human and knowing that that evolution is essentially what could get them to true recovery if they have to go through it again. So that's stages of change. And the reason I chose to talk about that today is because I get often that question about, my child doesn't even talk to me. How are they going to talk to you? Especially if it's a virtual appointment or, they're just, we've been there, done this. We have relapsed, and I don't know how you're going to be the answer this time. And I want, the people out there to know that in the Red Clinic, we really do think about this. And we think about this at Next Steps in general, is just what stages of change are the clients in, and how can we help them, get through action, but then truly get into maintenance. And so what does that mean? For our clinicians, we're always talking all the time about, well, they're coming back every week and they're talking about how they did it, and they don't necessarily complain anymore. They're not coming with problems anymore. Each week they're talking about how they've used coping skills and they've had more and more success. That's not necessarily a sign that it's time to end treatment. That's actually the sign that we're just about to achieve maintenance, and we need to kind of sit in that and enjoy it, because that's really the therapeutic part of therapy, is to learn what this new normal can look like and spend time in that. And so we actually see it out even further than just, every week they're coming back and they're doing good. It's like, well, every week they're coming back, they're doing good. Why would we stop what we know is working? We're not going to pull the support at that moment. We're going to say, let's do this for a little longer and make sure that we've achieved true maintenance before we part ways. So it's a whole journey when we apply this model to the care that we're giving to our clients with eating disorders and with really any mental health concern. And it's a cool journey. And so it's something that I get really excited about, because I get to be a part of that, and it's fun and it's inspiring. And so I guess that's what I'm saying to you all listening today, that if you are someone struggling with an eating disorder, you actually tend to really inspire me when you achieve recovery. So thank you so much, and I hope I see you again next week.